Hello and welcome to this Regcast on a BOFH-friendly cloud service. Now, I would have thought that was an oxymoron, wouldn't you? We're going to be talking about cloud and hosted services and why they play a greater role in IT, and how for production services you need the right level of visibility, of flexibility, portability, and control, of course. And we're going to help you find out what that means in practice. And with me I have four distinguished gentlemen to talk about that stuff. And so, would you like to introduce yourself, starting with you, Tony?
I think everybody in the audience probably knows me already, Manic. So, Tony Locke, analyst with Freeform Dynamics.
And I'm Dante Orsini. I run business development for iLand.
Simon Herbert. I work in a Cisco cloud organisation.
And I'm Jeremy Bowman. I'm from Fusion Business Solutions, and I'm IT Ops Director.
Well done, we've got over that hurdle. Right, Tony, would you like to do some scene setting for us?
Sure, certainly. I mean, these are some results that the Register audience have told us about in recent surveys. So what is everybody doing in terms of their infrastructure? Are they, rushing to the cloud, or are they just basically, where are they investing? And we can see from the chart that, yep, they're still investing in their internal infrastructure. They're definitely investing in cloud and hosted remote managed services. And there are some strategic investments going on at a much higher level. But are they moving to a fully integrated software-defined data center? Well, it's still early days for that. But basically what this says is that people are doing a mix of everything. They're running things internally, externally, and it's getting more and more combined, the two together.
Interesting you mentioned that word strategic, because when we were having a chat before this Regcast, you said people don't do that.
Well, people do tend to have, strategic ideas, but they almost never invest strategically. It's always tactically. We've got a problem, we've got to fix it. The real key, of course, is to invest in such a way to sort out your immediate problem that gives you the ability to expand in a more strategic fashion going on. But of course, the point with strategies, it's a bit like, war. It never survives first contact with the enemy.
This is true. And just a quick note to our good Reg people out there, don't forget you can put in your questions now. There'll be a question box on your screen, so please go ahead and when they come up, we'll ask them of our luminaries here. So would you like to talk about frequent visibility apps?
Absolutely.
Gaps.
This again is something that we asked the Register audience earlier this year. What are the challenges that they have around how cloud services are being used in their organisation? And you can see from the chart that basically most people don't have a really good idea of exactly what services are being used, how they're being deployed, and what control they have over them. So people want to know, where is the data, what data's going up there, which users are using it, are we getting the right service quality, are we paying the right amount for things, are we over-provisioning? Because, just like our internal infrastructure, where we buy everything up front, things can get over-provisioned in the cloud, because again, you want to keep the performance, to be as good as you need it to be for the service. So just getting things right, there's a lot of challenge with people not knowing enough about what's going on and how to manage that.
What's scary about that is the fact that I seem to remember talking about all this visibility stuff and how people didn't know what their assets were and so on and so forth, about 30 years ago.
And 25 and 20 and 15 and 10 and 5, and we'll probably still be doing the same in the future. The lack of knowledge that we have about the actual assets that we're using and how they're being used is, almost inherent in almost every IT organisation, because we're just trying to keep things going. We don't have time to step back and look at things.
And unless any... Oops.
Yeah, we see that a lot too when we talk to customers. I mean, especially when we're dealing with folks that are growing very rapidly through acquisition. In some cases, they have no idea what they just inherited, and trying to understand what's there, what's actually being utilized. In some cases, I've talked to folks that run operations that say, at some point we kind of thrown our hands up in the air and we want to just start to slowly turn things on and off and to see who barks about it, to see if it's being utilized, right?
Yep.
Yeah, I totally agree. Actually, we've done a lot of surveys with customers, mid-sized at enterprise level, and actually just deep level of inspection on where data traffic was going outside the business into cloud-based platforms. And actually, even some of the financial companies we've assessed have 26 times more cloud services they're being used by line of business, by individuals, etc. The billing is not always through IT; it's through credit cards, for example. And actually, we can look at that data as a team and assess the actual risks. What security risks there are, or breach of confidence risk, and that's never usually intentional. It's usually just purely because, in a consumer fashion, people within the business want to have more agile services from IT, and they can see it in the market, they go and provision it, and actually don't consult with IT at all. And that control needs to come back in again. So that's a big concern, but also a big opportunity.
That old shadow IT problem. I don't think we're going to get rid of that, are we?
No, absolutely not. It's just embracing the future, I think.
Embrace is a good word. From an operational perspective, you need to embrace shadow IT and make it the norm in terms of providing the operational control for your business objectives. So you can deliver your business objectives, you can deliver your service, encompassing all the streams of IT, because generally what you find from an operational perspective is shadow IT is generally the best way people have found to get there, what they need to get done, functional. So from an OpEx perspective, embrace that, but wrap it up in all of the other considerations for cloud deployment.
That's a tough ask, isn't it? I think we're going to be talking perhaps about that and other challenges.
We are indeed. I mean, again, the slide here just gives a couple of areas of the sorts of challenges that the register audience have told us about that they face. Top of them are getting the chance to assess the security of the cloud services before they're being used, because again, it might be a whole group doing something who are unaware of what security and what governance might be needed to be wrapped around a solution. Data is a problem, and where it goes, how it's controlled, all of this is really important. But again, for the users that just want to do something, security is usually somebody else's problem in the terms of Douglas Adams. And so just getting a handle on what's going on, getting a chance to make sure that we're doing the right things is really important. And then just keeping a track, as I mentioned earlier, of who's doing what are we doing? Are we using things appropriately? Are we even costing them appropriately? Because quite often with shadow IT, you might have multiple groups going off and buying things with no thought of volume discounts or things like this. So the whole process of accounting and recognition and reporting, visibility is inherent in all of this.
It's interesting you mentioned security. Sorry, Jeremy.
So I was going to chip in and say, inherent in shadow IT is the cost of credit cards and all that kind of stuff. But what end users don't really appreciate is IT budgets are fixed and often dropping. So that shadow IT cost has to be absorbed somewhere, and it has to be fitted and apportioned, and whether it goes into a service wrapper or whether it goes into a budget, that actually has a direct cost on the IT, and often it has an implication on delivery of other services because stuff has to fall off because shadow IT has to be costed.
Comment here from Luca on the lack of knowledge of IT infrastructure, and he says that's what says that's why infrastructure as code is important. There's a lot of interest in it.
There's a lot of interest in it, but
perhaps that gives it what is infrastructure as code.
Well, let me go back a step from that and actually getting that picture of what people have in place. Many years ago, I was a real IT manager, and I struggled to keep a handle on what we actually had and who was using it and whether it was being used at all, in terms of switching things off. I then went to work on the dark side for 3 years as a pre-sales guy, and one of the solutions we were trying to sell was asset management and inventory management to actually find out what was being used. And again, the sorts of things that have been talked about. I once worked for an organisation that, for example, when they had the external auditors come around and looking around their data centres, they actually found a mainframe on a pallet sitting in one of the computer data centre halls, still on the pallet. It had been there for 10 months, and it took them another 6 months to work out who'd ordered it. Mm-hmm. And this was in the days when mainframes are still not cheap. No. But they're reasonably chunky bits of kit, and in these days it was a very expensive acquisition, and it was just sitting there. So that lack of knowledge is inherent because, again, in IT we get things, we keep them running, we use them, and we don't have time always to sit back and get that real picture. But infrastructure as a service is a really nice idea, at least philosophically, but it's the practice of actually how can you encapsulate what you need in terms of resources, whether that's CPU, I/O, storage, of different qualities, the protection that's wrapped around it, everything like this, and turning it almost into the virtualized equivalents of each, and wrapping that and delivering them as needed.
I thought you might have some comments on that.
In terms of infrastructure, I think being able to control the whole infrastructure stack. I mean, if you look back, and you talk about the past of mainframes, that sort of thing. If you look now to the future about what the actual,
mainframes are still present as well.
Yeah, clearly, and what I'm talking about the data center infrastructure that we're peddling today, effectively, what we're looking at today, and the whole virtualization of the entire stack. The network through to the compute layer, through to the virtualization layer, and now in the near future, we're talking about the automation of that entire stack into the software layer. But I think it's giving that complete visibility and using tool sets. And there are many out there. And I think from different camps, you may have a different tool set for if you're an application-based person or a data center-based person that's best for you. But actually, it's a best of breed for everybody. And I think that there's going to be a big sea change in the future. And certainly from Cisco's perspective, we're working heavily to give a lot more automation back up into the application layer. So give visibility of the actual the compute, the storage, where the data center resides, etc., but also have flexibility back up to the application layer. So we're driving change and visibility as much as we possibly can.
Okay.
I was going to say, the interesting thing is it's all about delivering the service, which all the Reg audience knows, but how you can automate that is really important. How you can measure that service as well, because the fact that you give the application the right to change the underlying parameters will have an impact on the cost, particularly if it's a cost that you're pulling in from outside and paying for on a pay-per-use basis.
Yep.
How do you throttle that? What's the budget implications? What's the governance that needs to be wrapped around things? That's where it gets really complicated.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you bring up a great point, and from a cloud provider perspective, all that data exists, right? And the question is, are you willing to make it accessible for the end user, right? So that's clearly something.
It's not just making it accessible to the end user, it's which end user, and when that end user is doing different things, they might not have access to the same data and be able to use it in the same ways. This idea that you can just use any data for any purpose just isn't right legally in Europe, certainly, and in many other parts of the world. That you've got data for a specific use, and that's all you can use it for. You can't just chuck it into a big data engine somewhere and crunch it in a different way.
Right.
Data governance becomes really important wrapped around all of this.
Yeah, we talk about operational efficiencies and things of that nature, better management of the infrastructure. That's what I'm referring to, right? Because I think there's a massive challenge in public cloud, and a lot of folks are not providing that level of visibility into the infrastructure.
And it's interesting that, again, when we've talked to the register audience, they've told us time after time that even their management tools for looking after their internal infrastructure isn't quite at that level of sophistication to allow them as much control or ease of control without having to risk changing, because we know that change is what causes most service interruptions. It's not failure.
And automating the messy things like compliance and all that kind of stuff.
But the Reg audience like the idea of automation as much as they can trust it. So,
of course. Well, automation removes human error, doesn't it?
Yeah. There's also an extension to that point you were making about having the tools and the maturity of the tools available out there. What Fusion done is, that's our bag, is service management. So we provide customers, and we work a lot with customers who have the challenges you mentioned about discovering their assets and not having the agility in their own data centers, which is actually coincidentally one of the main drivers we find for the cloud adoption is lack of agility in their own in-house provision. But to kind of add to one of your points about having the tool set available, yes, there are loads of tool sets out there, but it's not so much having the tool set as understanding the information it gives you.
yep.
So
Absolutely.
there's lots of static information out there. There's lots of metrics that you can gather about your infrastructure, but it's understanding that, crunching it in a data engine, as you were saying, but then understanding that and applying that. So how do we apply that to provide our service? How do we provide that for our cost analysis? So that is kind of the end goal of operational deployment, is understanding the data that you've actually got.
And this is going to tie in quite nicely with some of the other things we're going to talk about later. So when you change things, what's the impact of that change going to be on the service quality that you're delivering? How you measure service quality? It might be availability, it might be in terms of speed of process, transaction, whatever. What's the right service level metric to use?
And we'll get to that later, folks. And moving on to enterprise cloud services. Dante.
Yeah, so at iLand, we've been delivering an enterprise cloud services platform for years now, 9 years to be exact. You may not have heard of us in this market, but we've been here for a long time. We've been delivering IT services since 1995, and the early phase of our growth was focused on co-location and IP services. So at one point, we were managing over 50 data centers between North America and Europe. But we entered the cloud space here, primary location being London, secondary location being Manchester, 5 years ago. But for us, this has been a very customer-focused journey. We entered really a managed virtualization state 9 years ago, and as cloud was getting more and more traction and the interest was there, we started to partner with best-of-breed providers like Cisco, like VMware, because our customers were worried about high availability, fault tolerance, performance, things of that nature. But as time went on and people were interested in more cloud and more automation, we adopted some of these technologies, but we quickly realized in talking to our customers that they wanted more. And to your point, Tony, folks wanted much better visibility into the performance of the infrastructure. They also wanted to understand exactly how they would scale these environments and what they would cost them. So you can imagine how this impacts an environment when you're talking about running production applications, right? Years ago, a lot of folks were thinking about, let's just start with development and testing. Things were not absolutely crucial to the business. But as you might imagine, right, adoption picks up. The thing that we're known most for is providing disaster recovery for these infrastructures. But I think where we've focused most of our time in our development is trying to develop a better platform based on the feedback of our customers. So a couple years ago, we actually started to build our own development team. And we wanted to focus on those two main hurdles, right? How do we provide the right level of transparency and visibility? And then how do we also provide the right level of cost? So if you can provide that data from a global perspective and then start to allow people to drill in, right? So if I could look at a specific location, look into a specific application or even into an individual VM and understand exactly what's happening with performance, but at the same time being able to correlate events as well as cost, it's helping people right-size these environments. Because as you mentioned, if I don't understand how I'm leveraging this capacity locally, when I get into a cloud environment, that's the expectation that I'd over-provision. And we were contrarian to that. We want to provide people with all the visibility in the world because they'll realize where they're actually wasting money and they can actually right-size these environments and get more out of their cloud experience.
And how's it gone so far?
So far, so good. I think it's been great. I think we've had some great adoption. With organizations that work with us either in the States, in Europe, or even in Singapore. And at the same time, we're also continuing to press that innovation button, right? So from day one, when we release this platform, we've been focusing on a very aggressive release schedule. So every quarter, we're putting out a new release. But the part that I think our development team's so proud of is that from day one, we've actually had a little tab in this portal that gives people the ability to provide direct feedback to our development team. And that feedback is actually global. So any user can post anything they feel like, and any other user can see it. Now, granted, we're not disclosing company names, but that allows people to understand exactly what's been requested, and our development team will actually provide updates. To say, hey, this is under review, this is something that we're doing, this is something that we're not doing. And I think that's helped guide us, right? So when we first released this a couple years ago, we were excited, and I think we gave a great level of visibility, but immediately there were requests like, hey, this is great, but can you do this? Can you do that? Right? Give me the ability to alert, not only on performance, but on cost. Great, we can do that. But that's what brings us to where we are today. I mean, as you might imagine, there's still a lot of hurdles with people adopting cloud. And security is definitely one of them. Mm-hmm. So we recently released our advanced security suite. So we took the base security that's associated with our platform. As you might imagine, you've got to have enterprise class firewalling services, right? VPNs, SSL, all that good stuff, dual factor authentication, vulnerability scanning across the infrastructure. But we took that and wanted to add another whole layer for folks that are focusing on heavily compliant-driven environments, right? So being able to provide encryption at rest on the storage system is great, right? But I think that what a lot of users are asking for is they want to be able to control encryption at the VM level, to be able to choose specific VMs they want to encrypt. We've worked with HITRUST on that. Are you guys familiar with HITRUST? Mm-hmm. Okay. I know Cisco is familiar with HITRUST, but they've done some great collaboration with Cisco and Intel and VMware. So imagine being able to pin the decryption process to a specific host or a couple hosts in a cluster. So if someone tries to decrypt and it's not on that infrastructure, they won't be able to.
Mm-hmm. It's certainly a matter that we've talked about before on previous webcasts, the fact that VMs by their very nature are quite portable and very easy to move either accidentally or by design. And so the fear of someone removing a VM and running it somewhere else, if it's encrypted and they don't have the encryption keys, which then gets into the whole matter of how do you manage encryption keys over a long period of time. That's really the heart of encryption where we think we're getting issues. But the other thing that's really important here on the security side is also the perception of data location as well. Yep. Some places there might be genuine governance requirements and genuine legislation requirements on where data can and cannot go. But in other places it's just in people's heads as well, and that's equally as important as any legislation. Where people want their data to be.
Just to pick up on the legislation point, several of our customers, it's more important to our customers that come to us for a service management piece, they say where the data cannot reside is more important to them than where can it reside. So that's part of the discovery piece that we have in the conversation with our customers when we describe their service to them is where can your data reside, but where can't it reside? So just sort of geolocation and geo-sovereignty is very key.
Do they always know?
No.
That was my question, yes.
No, because they don't always know. So that's the part of the discussion that defines the service wrapper. So we have a great repartee with all of our customers. And it always starts with defining the service. So they define the service to us, we go away, we crunch it through our internal systems, we talk to our providers and say, how can we provide this service? How do we provide the metrics? And then we go back to the customer and we start a dialogue. And it's always a dialogue, because there's never a cookie cutter approach. You can never go, this is the same service, because every service is different, every infrastructure is different.
And it's a trust relationship.
And it's a trusted relationship. So our customers trust us to provide them the service. Conversely, we then push back on Ireland as one of our cloud providers to say, we trust you to provide us our service. Without you, we can't do our jobs. So providing that trust is key.
One cloud provider I've spoken to said it can take up to 6 months to develop that relationship. I mean, is that your experience?
Yeah, it can be. I mean, we've partnered with Ireland for a couple of years now, and our relationship has grown up. It's more of a personal relationship. It started as a personal relationship rather than a technical relationship. That's how I often find our relationships in our business work best at a personal level. If I know, I mean, their tech's great, and I trust all of their tech and all the rest of it, but I know if I need to reach out to Dante, or if I need the local resources, I know they're there. I know the guys, I can just reach out and say, I need this, help, fires are raging, help me out, and they've got my back. And that's huge for a cloud provider. But you can't say that with some of the other cloud providers. So that's where we say, well, if we're going to put a service wrapper around something, we need that human element. I mean, I know there are some cloud providers which we have used and we continue to use in shadow IT form or not, where you can't actually talk to a human being. Mm-hmm. I mean, if the fires are raging and stress levels are high and all the rest of it, you need to talk to a human being rather than an automated system. You can't rely on automation tools in order to get you out of situations. So,
no, I was going to refer back to the security piece. I mean, it's very simple, but everybody we speak to who's moving to a cloud-based platform expects the security element to be the same and or better. And that's definitely the case. And we don't build these environments. We don't validate the designs that we do with our partners, whether you're brokering services or you're building services or you're just consuming it as a private instance. The security element is evolved. We are absolutely building in much more secure environments, much more control. The bit I think the partners in both Fusion and Ireland actually add is that visibility, that auditability, that control, which as a vendor of products, we can give best practice, but we don't operate the platform, right? We can evolve the actual validate design, that's what we always call them, and actually make sure they're always bleeding edge. They're integrating the best technology we develop at a BU level, a product level, as well as a ecosystem. So we work with other vendors, you've mentioned before there, with other vendors that make that whole solution work. But security absolutely underpins all of it. And that's one of our Cisco's mantras. We have to make it sure it's not just enterprise grade, it's production grade, but it's absolutely secure. And I think there's a lot of that Ireland add to the relationship that give you not only that trust relationship, but also that confidence in delivering that solution at the same time, but using best practices that industry have pre-tested, absorbed all the costs for it and pre-tested it and say, this works. And actually, from our point of view as an enterprise networking vendor, and a data center vendor and unified comms vendor and everything else that goes with it, is that we have to make sure it's ready for enterprise. We're not a consumer-based product. We never will be.
And for me, excuse me, as the nominal end user, that's key, because Cisco make the cool tech, Ireland delivers the cool platform, we can deliver a cool service, and our customers love that. They're happy.
Well, they're interested in availability rather than security, aren't they? I
sure.
suspect.
I mean, yeah. So availability, they come to us for a service. They want availability, and wrapped up in that is the support element as well. So that's what we talked about the human element. But availability and security kind of come hand in hand. So the cost element does come in, but because we put a service wrapper around the whole thing, the whole piece, availability and security are key, because our customer, it's the trust thing. Our customers trust us to provide them the service. We do that in a cost-effective basis, and our customers are happy.
I think to both of your points, I mean, one of the things that we've done, and yes, we went through a rigorous audit with Cisco, did go validate the infrastructure, right?
Painful, right?
Yeah, it's definitely a high bar. But what I was going to say is, in working with folks like Jeremy and Fusion, and when we understand, where people want to be from a security perspective, yes, it's an absolute expectation, right? But I think the other thing is what we've done with our platform is we've identified some of the best of breed technologies that our customers are looking for, and we've actually integrated them to make their lives a lot easier. So think about, normal security elements around antivirus, anti-malware, intrusion detection, right? Intrusion prevention, log monitoring and management. Imagine all that being API driven. So when you deploy a workload, it works, right? So we're able to apply policy on the back end, and then, again, in true form, from a transparent perspective, we have a lot of customers that are they're either in a regulated industry or they're dealing with customers that are in a regulated industry, right? So we wanted to take that next step and provide tons of visibility and reporting against all these elements. So imagine being able to run reports on any type of activity that's been taken in the environment, whether it's based on your administration or something that happened with an engineer at Island. Think about all the reporting from a security perspective and being able to produce those reports with the click of a button, right? And be able to slide them across the table in preparation for an internal audit or even in some cases an external audit.
Tony, I was going to say the really important thing here again that Jeremy and Dante and even Simon have touched on is the idea that this is about getting the right service to the end user, so the people out there watching us now, and getting them the support in particular once this is up and running, because while you've got Dante behind you and Cisco behind you to give you the support when your back's up against the wall, your customers want the same thing from you. Absolutely. When they things are either going wrong or they've got challenges of their own that they want to talk to you about. Is that something that comes across quite often? Absolutely. That they really want to have that trust with you, and they leave the rest of it behind. That's your problem. Their relationship is with you. Yeah,
totally. Our customers have a very strong relationship with Fusion. So when we do service management, we have that relationship on a one-to-one basis. So we have the usual account managers and all the rest of it that go out and stuff, but they know that they can rely on us. We'll be there when they want us.
And that's with telephone support, real people.
Telephone support, web support, all that kind of good stuff is all there for.
And service management.
Yeah, and service management is kind of our aegis, yeah.
What sort of services are people coming to you asking for? Are they changing from the disaster recovery and the DevOps stuff that we talked about as being the early adopter side of cloud?
It's generally, the applications that we provide are generally from the BMC toolset, so we're a BMC Premier partner. We help our customers with the large challenges in IT. So we talked earlier on about asset discovery is a good one. So we talk to global organisations about global data centres. We talk about the pallet with the mainframe on. That rings true so many times in so many different data centres that we've been in. We have customers who have 25, 35, 45,000 physical server instances in their data centres. They don't know what's going on. So they come to us and say, hey, take away our pain. So we are actually absorbing service pain for our customers and saying, you know what, we can help you manage that pain, or we can take some of that pain away and we can provide you with a service wrapper and say, hey, if you want support, you want us to provide you with a service, you want a managed service, all that kind of good stuff, we can make it happen for you. So that is what the service management piece is all around for us.
And what are your biggest challenges?
So our biggest challenges in terms of service management is divorcing the customer from the cloud provider. So in terms of cloud adoption, we are actually the customer. Fusion is the customer because our customers come to us for a service. They don't necessarily come to us for a cloud service. So when we talk about cloud adoption, we talk about service management as a whole, we say, well, we need to provide these parameters for our service. On the back of that, then we go to our marketplace and say, well, hey, Island have got the resources that we need, they meet that availability, and we can deploy all that infrastructure. But then we generally look at how the service is architected, and we say, well, why do we want to build that ourselves? Dante and Cisco have talked a lot about how the platforms are architected and how the technology is used to provide the prerequisite security access and all that kind of good stuff. So what Simon was saying earlier about inherent security, it's an expectation. Expectation is probably the most simple drill down form from an end user using cloud services. It's an expectation. I don't expect to have to think about that.
It's interesting that, from a customer perspective, I can't help wondering, well, here's another layer of cost here that you're adding into this piece.
I'll comment on that piece if that's okay.
Yeah.
So in our experience, and we in my working life at Cisco, I talk to customers and I talk to partners and that sort of thing. We build out services, and I think the biggest feedback we get, and don't get me wrong, cloud is mature in the market. People are adopting it for whatever reason, but if you just read the press, you'd be forgiven. I think everyone's on this boat, everyone's taken the ticket, everyone's gone. Customers aren't in that phase yet. And actually, bizarrely, the one number that keeps coming up is 5 years. Our strategy is to go to cloud in 5 years. Now, 5 years, in my perspective, is pretty long time. And in cloud time terms, it's a huge amount of time. So what that tells me is most customers have a strategy, a decision to go to cloud, but they don't know what steps to take. Now, the obvious ones are things like what Microsoft's doing with AWS. So I'm talking with Azure, with AWS for test and dev production environments. Simple things that make a change. But the biggest thing that guys like Fusion do is help the customer make decisions, create a decision tree to say what's appropriate to move into a private DC, to move into a cloud DC, and you guys know that how to manage that. And it's not about what's the appropriate service provider to deliver that at the first instance. It's actually a technical level, data where it resides, how do you access it, how is it integrated together?
So translation of the business.
Yeah, so looking at if we take 3 software silos and think, well, how do they operate together? How could we make them more efficient? What's driving change? For example, software vendors drive change inside businesses. How is that better adopted? Are there other options? And you guys have an absolute necessity within the customer to say, let's make a structured decision how you do that. Because what happens, DR is incredibly popular. If you're not doing DR, you're missing a trick. In the cloud, right? It's very, very simple, it's very easy. And what we see is that customers who do DR find trust in partnerships with Ireland and Fusion, and then they start absorbing more services. That's not strategic, that's opportunistic. That's like, okay, I kind of get that. What's the next step? What's the next step? And doesn't play to that 5-year strategy which the CIO is asking for. It says, tell me what the easiest next soft step I need to take. You guys can make that whole decision tree much, much simpler, but just by having that consultation. So you never underestimate that extra layer of customer intimacy that you're going to have. We're a vendor of products. You build platforms that make them ready for market. You help make the customer make decisions, and that's vital, absolutely vital.
The important thing that the register audience tell us about time after time is that it's great when they go to somebody to get a service, because they like the idea of a service. But the one thing that's absolutely certain is that the service that they talk to you about today is probably not going to be the service that they're running with you tomorrow, because things change and they can change quite rapidly. And a lot of the feedback we get is that not all service providers are flexible on change. Some cloud providers in particular have a reputation that they're great at flexing up, but they can't flex down at all. We've talked to people who say that the only way to flex down is to kill the contract and start again. And so that sort of, whole thing about how do we deal with change, how do we manage change with you to keep things flowing, what happens there?
Well, that's a very good point about IT grows, but IT also contracts. And life cycle is also very key in service management. So lots of our service wrappers that we put around our products are multi-tiered. So we'd have the test dev and all that, and you have the rip and replace for the test cycles and all the rest of it. But the production systems, once they're up and running and they're up stable in their final location, whether that be on-prem or whether that be in a cloud instance, usually pretty static. So then we talk about portability. Well, do we need to port that? Generally not. Our customers say, well, we've got it there, we've got it running. Me as a customer, I'm happy because that is running stable and it's running fine. The only time we might have to move it is in DR scenarios. So Simon Dante talked about DR. DR is a killer use case for us. I talk about reinventing the wheel and divorcing the customer from the pain. Why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you go to a service provider who does DR really well and say, because DR is 2 letters, fantastically simple to say, fantastically difficult to achieve. Fantastically difficult to achieve because dynamic applications, dynamic environments, changing all the time, keeping the ops manual up to date is a headache for most people, let alone having a consistent DR that works at the click of a button. That is the challenge that a lot of IT companies face. They come to us and say, hey, do you know much about DR? Can you help us provide our availability? We say, yeah, sure. We have the tools that we can provide that service.
Okay, so we're about halfway through. So another reminder to our lovely rich people out there, ask questions because I've got a widget here that will pop them up, and I'll be asking those to the team. And I think maybe it's now to move on to customer support, which I think Dante's going to be talking about.
Yeah, and I think just to wrap up that last question or statement around disaster recovery, I wholeheartedly agree, right? So that's another thing that we're very well known for, but we actually chose to integrate that into our platform. For somebody like Jeremy that's delivering services for an end customer, they can have this option. If they want to provide disaster recovery, they can. And we've automated the entire process, right? But back to the reporting side of that, that's also crucial. Because it's one thing to say you can do it, it's another thing to prove it. And
testing is a killer.
That's right.
Very few people test anything, even their really critical systems, because it's complicated, it's expensive.
Yep.
So you don't get the right results until it's actually in use.
And it's prone to going wrong.
Yep.
And roll back, don't even go there.
Yeah. So imagine being able to run a test non-intrusively, right? And then export a report that will give you a list of every task taken against the infrastructure and its status. Again, internal reporting. One of our customers that's in the States, a global pharmaceutical company, actually, they deliver services to the pharmaceutical space. They're a laboratory organization. And they, years ago, worked with us. In this case, we were simply the disaster recovery target for them. And now they're expanding, including some additional applications from a production perspective. But it was great to see the senior director there was meeting and actually being audited by one of his pharma customers. And when they asked about disaster recovery, typical ask. Even a few years ago, people would ask, do you have a plan? Has it been tested? Yes, we do. Yes, it has. Check, right? People are a lot more savvy these days, right? And before they could even ask another question, he said, hey, come here, let me show you something. And he came around his desk, and he actually went in and he initiated a test failover. This is not trivial. This is, 300 virtual machines, right? So as everything's coming up, right, he basically exports this report and said, there you go, there's my plan, it's been tested. And the auditors from this pharma organization fell out. They couldn't believe that he did it because most people, to your point, they're afraid to test, right? And I just encourage people, if they have requirements there, the technology's gone a long way. And some of us have actually taken that next step to integrate these things to make it much easier, right?
The other thing with DR is that it's been so expensive and complicated to do that people have tended to confine it to just one or two absolutely mission critical, cannot fail apps. Whereas now they've got a lot of end customer pressure, whether they're external customers or internal customers, users as I still call them, actually demanding or expecting to get more and more of a sort of consumer cloud type experience that if it does fail, it's going to be back again within 30 seconds. So they need to expand that DR capability to an ever broader application portfolio.
I just wanted to touch quickly on a point there that I know it's a buzzword, but there's this concept of the domino effect within multi-tiered applications. If one falls over, the rest fall over as well. So the traditional DR methods that we traditionally saw back in the day before virtualization and just starting into virtualization. If you DR your main servers, then you have to DR tiers, multiple tiers, backends, global load balancers, all the rest of it. Nowadays, we can just group them all together and say, hey, you know what, we're going to fail over that application, DR, done. So the technology, as Dante said, has moved so much. So when Simon was saying about IT plan a strategy for 5 years, who knows what we're going to be doing in 5 years, but it ain't going to be, we're on a growth curve that's only accelerating.
Let's drag this back to the initial sort of premise of what we were supposed to be talking about, guys, which was about visibility and control and portability and flexibility.
Sure.
Tony, you've got some points to make.
Again, this is just summarising the things that the register audience have told us time after time, in survey after survey, face-to-face conversations with the folks out there. They come to us and say, yep, we don't have a strategic 5-year plan to move to the cloud. We might be moving to cloud type adoption, but some of that cloud is going to be internal, some of it will be external, there'll still be dedicated services, there'll still possibly even be some silos inside here because we've got a particular application that demands a silo. It's becoming more and more of an exception, but that's it. But what they do expect is they're going to be running very much this hybrid type approach where they've got internal stuff, external stuff, things that they can control very closely, very tightly, other things that are running outside of their borders that they'd want to control very tightly but currently don't really have that option. So what they're looking for is to get a series of systems in place where they can actually try and combine the two together together, certainly at an operational process level, so that we don't have to run completely different, day books on how to keep things working, whether they're running internally or externally. So they're looking to have the ability to provision workloads wherever they want, whether it's external, internal, move them between the two. That's still at a theoretical level pretty much at the moment, but they like that. The other thing they like about the external cloud thing is there's still this fear of lock-in. If we go to an external cloud provider, are we stuck with them? And it's going to be really hard to move if we want to change for whatever reason. Either we fall out, they stop wanting to offer the service, or we just want to do something different, or someone comes along who's cheaper. Can we migrate between external clouds? So we need that ability to move things around, internal, external. We want to move things around internally, and we've only just got good at doing that to a degree. We need administration tools that let us look after everything together as a whole. Data management and protection, absolutely essential, but we want to have the same things that let us look after all of this without having to run completely separate systems, or possibly multiple different sets of systems, 2 or 3 internal control systems, 2 or 3, 4, 5, 6 external control systems.
Can I just chip in about an interesting concept about our mindsets is 2 things that I often see when we're having customers come to us and have conversations about deployments is they're often of the mindset about the on-premise, about this whole thing about cloud hybrid, about on-premise and off-premise. 2 things. One is cost, obviously. The internal cost, there's like an almost invisible perception of cost about an on-premise application running. I mean, it essentially has an invisible cost to the end user. But when it moves to a cloud provider, you actually get given a bill at the end of the month. It's like, right, stump up some money from your budget. So that's one thing that comes into the mindset of the users, but also some technology drivers from within the customers come to us and say they actually want to walk into a room in their office and kick a box and say, right, that's my finance system. I know it's there, it's in a room, I can lock the door and walk away. So there's still a very that's still a big hurdle in the mindset of some people that they actually need. It's a security thing. Not a security, a comfort thing. Yeah, that's the word, comfort thing. So they can walk into a room and kick the box and say that, that's there, I can lock it up, I can walk away at night and I know the building is secure. So that's another challenge that we have when we talk to our customers about when we put a service wrap around products is when we're delivering service, we have that conversation as well. It's like, well, do you actually want to go in the server room and kick the server? Or are you happy to provide us with the trust in order that we can then deliver the service without you being able to do that?
Can I just pick up on a point that Tony made and ask you, because what happens when a customer wants their data back?
What happens when they want their data back?
Yes.
So
they want to migrate it to another provider, or they've decided maybe even heaven forfend, they don't want to go in the cloud.
They want to bring it back in touch. Yeah.
So
some things do move both ways.
Absolutely. We do that. We can do that. I mean, there are mechanisms where we can move infrastructure around. I mean, there are standard processes where we can take hosted applications and turn them into internally hosted applications. Fortunately, the technologies deployed in cloud providers and on-premise are largely the same. So on Iland's cloud, for example, they use the same backend technology that we use in our own private cloud internally. So moving, I mean, it's not completely seamless, as you said, but moving applications around between data centers is actually very easy, common container formats and all the rest of it. So we can very easily say to our customers, you can have the trust that we can move your application workloads around as you want. May not be with 0 downtime, but if we're talking about portability of applications, sure.
It's something that the register audience have told us about, particularly more and more over the last couple of years, that the early adopters, that the big challenge was actually moving things into the cloud in the first place. But now they've reached a stage of maturity where some of them have recognised, well, what do we do at the end of life of this service? How do we move things back in? Because we might need to archive it and keep it for a very long time. Are you going to offer that as well? So these are the sorts of things that people are getting into here around the whole security and compliance that we've talked around. But that's a very broad thing, and it's going to extend in terms of years and years and years and years, as well as the management and the whole monitoring of the service quality. And that service quality could change over time, so we've touched on that. But then it comes down to these things like troubleshooting and support. So because these things do change everything changes. How can we keep that going? So these are the really core elements that come up from the register audience when we talk to them.
Which segues nicely into the whole issue of hybrid cloud. Because,
Yeah,
you know,
because
how do you mix and match
the
those?
register audience have told us that they expect to be running more and more cloud type services. We ran a survey probably about 18 months ago, 2 years ago, where we said to people, what's your idealized, data center of the future? Ignore where you are now, because we always know that it's great if you can build something up front, but getting there from where you are now, that's a pain. But just in terms of a purely philosophical sort of architecture, what would things look like? And they told us that, the idea of delivering service quality and managing service delivery rather than managing infrastructure is something that very much is in their minds, and that's where they can see great benefits from. So it all ties in with the sorts of things we've been talking about. Having it very flexible, easy to provision, single click, lots of automation. These are things that the folks out there really want to do. They need help on actually getting there, though.
So Dante, would your customers, not you, but your customers recognise that picture?
Yeah, definitely. And I think there's a couple different things we see, right? I mean, earlier on you talked about a couple different things, right? The ability to actually leverage a cloud environment, but can you actually, grow and contract, right? And I think that some of us have figured that out, right? We've actually put certain billing methodologies in place to give people that flexibility to go up and down.
It's never been a technical problem. It's always been
commercial.
It's been a commercial business model problem.
Yep. But when you talk about,
But can you give us some examples of where that's actually happened?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have customers that will actually have projects, much to Jeremy's point, they'll have certain workloads where they know that it's going to be static, right? Within a range of variable that's very minimal, right? But then they have other things where, I think one of the biggest advantages that IT leaders have in leveraging a cloud is they can be wrong. Think about new projects, right? I mean, think about politically, internally, how challenging it can be to rubber stamp something traditionally where you had a massive investment, right? You're talking about infrastructure, people, everything else, where now you can simply take risk and pay for what you utilize. And we definitely see that. We definitely see organizations that are trying to bring new services to market, and the traditional project has to flex because they don't know what they don't know, right? So having the ability to start in one place and scale if they need to or scale back is absolutely advantageous.
It also works with the way lots of organizations' budgets are still set up. The idea of having a shared infrastructure is great, to everyone out there. But quite often their own internal budgets still don't work that way, that make it possible. It's still project by project, or partly funded in some weird and obscure way. So getting through to things like chargeback or blameback or something like this, service payment reporting internally for systems is something that again seems being really good idea, difficult to do, but the way things have to change. So getting it where you can actually charge project by project, so it's very clear. And then maybe once you've got that built, look at if you're going to run it for a long period of time, bring it internally if it's stable, once you've tested it. But the idea of testing things easily and simply without having to put in a lot of investment, both in time and money up front, is clearly advantageous in many ways.
Although chargeback, I think, is a bit of a double-edged sword, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah, well, it's a double-edged sword, but the interesting thing is that when you talk to business managers, the majority of them do actually recognize how important IT is. We love in the industry to actually criticize IT as being a cost center, but the reason it's a cost center is it's doing important stuff, guys. Most businesses, if they had a cost that they didn't need, they'd get rid of it. As far as I'm aware, no one's got rid of IT. And I don't think that's going to change either.
But another great point about chargeback, though, right? And some of the leadership that we speak to, they're very understanding of shadow IT and know that it happens, right? But at the same time, at some point, it's frustrating because that's budget that's walking out the door because people fight so hard for the budget every year. Right? So having much better visibility, whether it's project-based, right, or term-based, and having to be able to segregate these environments and track spend, right, and have notifications against that spend, we found has been critical for folks because it's allowing them to have a better understanding of where they should be appropriating funds to justify further investment. So working with somebody that can give you that visibility and transparency is pretty important.
I was just going to say, to add to that, we've kind of gone full circle and we're back to visibility again. Because this whole mindset thing of having the cost of invisible IT internal versus the actual cost of having a cloud instance, when you have like the portal that ILAM provides us, we can actually use that as a tool to say, hey, if you're hosting this application in the same sort of way, this is what it costs. So we can then actually kind of, not truly, but kind of map that to an internal project and say, well, you know, show back, blame back, if you like. This is the perceived cost, or this is the actual cost in the cloud environment. So we can use that as a budget model for an internal project and say, well, loosely based, you know, cost-based, cost centers are slightly different, but we can use that show back to apply to internal as well, and we have done that in the past.
I just wanted to talk about the hybrid piece on the slide you've got here. That's definitely the feedback we get from customers. It's not everyone sort of think it's all about a cloud, public cloud or not. But I think you can strip down hybrid into being you choose one application to sit in the cloud, you choose another application to be on premise. That's a very simplistic hybrid. Definitely the conversations we're having today are let's compartmentalise that application, data set, compute, for example, and where do they reside? And one example was in the UK public sector where the compute for a very important police application was at front end in a certain security level, and then the data set behind that was sat at a much higher security level. And using the tool sets that Ireland use with Intercloud, which we'll come on to in a minute, can actually port data sets, port applications securely across boundaries, which you've highlighted there.
Yep.
And you can start utilising that sort of software. And that's definitely, all those points you've mentioned there are either areas we're proactively working on to make them simpler, make them more available. The first 2 points about the management tools and the APIs, we're actively got products in market, really.
We actually worked really closely with Cisco and wrote connectivity between Intercloud Fabric and our cloud platform, right? And the goal here was to make it much easier for organizations to move these applications. And in some cases, you know, to Simon's point, actually decouple applications, right? But this goes back to what you were speaking about earlier, Tony, and that's knowing or making it easier for people to actually do this.
Yep.
And as the role of IT changes and there's more and more demand to really understand what cloud to leverage for what purpose, I think Cisco is really innovating heavily here to give people the ease of adopting multiple, you know, clouds, but while maintaining control and the visibility
and the control.
This is the really important thing. The previous slide talked about how important management tools were. What it didn't show was how well people thought the tools that they had available to them today were actually performing.
Yeah.
And that's because the numbers that thought they were performing really well and that vendors had given them good tools to do this stuff with was, you know, really small. You know, people know that they need these capabilities, but they just don't have them. They don't think people are giving them yet, which is why this sort of portability is really important, because people don't like the idea of lock-in, you know, in any area. You know, the fact that you've really got to put all of your eggs into a basket and keep that basket floating for a long time is a big step to take. When you give people the trust that they can move things around more easily, then they're actually likely to move quicker anyway. They probably won't move after that, but you know, it's a comfort factor as much as everything else. It's a lot about perception. Same as security.
That's exactly one of the reasons why we chose to get on board with Cisco and help lead this charge, right? Because we believe that this is a very competitive marketplace, and you've got to continue to innovate and listen to your customers and deliver. And if you can't deliver, you know, you're not going to be successful, right? So you have to take that first step, and you got to be open and transparent, and then start to listen to figure out exactly what a customer is requiring. And we do hear that folks are concerned about vendor lock-in, right? We like to think that we're going to do a great job of delivery, right? But at the end of the day, we realize the need.
How good a job you're doing.
Exactly. Yeah. People need the option.
Yeah. I was just going to say that again, it's the term hybrid cloud. I mean, I'm going to go right back to simplistic. A lot of the customers that we talk to, we mentioned hybrid cloud. A lot of them throw their arms up in the air and say hybrid cloud, which means their perception is that they actually have to run an application part in the cloud and part on premise, and the single instance will span both. And that's part of our conversation as part of the service definition is no, you don't have to. You know, you're not spanning security boundaries. You're not putting some of your data out there, quote unquote, at risk, and that goes back to the kick in the box in the server room again. So the less critical stuff with maybe exemplar data may be happy to live out in a private cloud or a public cloud, and then the other production stuff may live internally. But that's another hurdle, talking about hybrid cloud, that we just have to get over. That we have that conversation a lot with our customers.
The other great thing is that everyone assumes that all workloads are really highly variable. Most of them are not. You know, they're pretty constant. You know, they might grow slowly over time. They might contract slowly. You know, there are very few that are really rapid responses, and they are usually met with completely different engines anyway.
Okay, so we're into the last 5 minutes or so, and this is your last chance, lovely Reg people, to pop in a question or two, because I'm going to ask each of these gentlemen to give us a couple of minutes of final thoughts, wrapping up the whole sort of piece, what we're talking about: visibility, control, portability, flexibility. Who wants to start? I'm going to give Tony the last shout. So, Jeremy.
Okay, so my last takeaway from this generally is service management is about a discussion. So if customers come to us and they want a service delivery, then we can deliver from a tool set that we have available. How we deliver that is dependent on the discussion, obviously, but it relies on a few different core things: availability, security, visibility, cost. Those are the 4 things, probably in that order. But visibility, accessibility and security are the key drivers that we find drive our operational controls with service delivery.
Great. Yeah, just then, from our perspective, I want to reinforce the fact that the importance of the relationships that you're going to have in this movement forward. People like Fusion, Ireland, for example, are critical for your thinking process, without a shadow of a doubt. These guys are well-seasoned people in this industry. From our perspective at Cisco, I'm going to talk about the hybrid cloud piece. So I think that one thing we haven't discussed very much today, and I think definitely worth following up in both these parties, is looking at that management layer, seeing a demonstration of what it looks like, because we have moved on. Intercloud is a software set that Cisco have created. It's an ever-evolving environment, but right now you have that portability with it. If you see what is possible, what's capable of doing today, what you're able to do at application level with the platforms that are in cloud today, you can move data sets, applications from one cloud to another one over boundaries, and we're talking WANs, securely across the whole thing. And you are in control. You have that ability to do that sort of thing. So if your concern is that, see the demos, talk to these guys, see what's possible today, be exploratory about what you need to do next. Don't be committed, but be reasonable about thinking we should be thinking a lot further ahead than 5 years. Because one of the things we've found is if we talk to clients about their journey and we talk to their peers, there's quite a lot of variation. And if their peers are innovating in cloud, they are quicker to market. They are one of the ones that are changing their cost model. They're the ones that are adapting. So if you are behind on your cycle and adoption and your thinking, think about your competitors in market, because if they're adopting digitization and utilizing cloud to make that happen, they're going to be quicker than you are, without a doubt.
Yeah, and I mean, to that point, I mean, clearly we're heavily focused on making sure our customers have a great experience and they're able to accomplish their goals. And every organization is a little bit different and what they're trying to accomplish, right? So to Simon's point, I would encourage you to really investigate the platforms and test these platforms and have a look around. I mean, we'd love to do that. The one thing we didn't focus a lot during this presentation around, I think Jeremy touched on it, but the other piece that's very, very different about iLand is we provide support as part of our service. We bake it in because we know that the end user's experience with our platform is the key to the growth of our platform over time. So we see that as such a critical component of maintaining a strong experience that we invest heavily in the right type of support engineering. So we want to make sure that when someone picks up a phone and they can pick up a phone, they can call and they can talk to a human, and that human will actually help them with their problem. So we focus on providing a tier 2 engineering experience on that first call so we can eliminate challenges early.
I was going to say, service management is the future. The Reg audience get that, they know that. It's all about delivering the right service at the right time. Things will change, but the support thing is really key, because these are going to be things that you're looking after for a long, long time. But what BOFH doesn't want is to talk to a human. He wants to talk to another BOFH.
Yeah.
So.
Yep. Good point. Did I mention that we have an API?
Enough with the pitching already.
That's right. Yeah. Throw the vendor out.
Openly admitting your BOFH is the first stage, yeah.
That's right.
Yes. All right. Well, unless anybody's got any final points to make, I think we're going to wrap it up now. And so I'd like to say thank you very much. Hopefully on your screens now you'll see a list of further reading, some points that, some research that we've got available for you. So look at that. And with that, I'd like to say thanks very much for watching. Hope you have found it useful. We tried to stop these guys pitching, perhaps not hard enough, but we'll do our best in future. Okay, and thanks very much.